Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Hannah. Welcome to Met Psych Health. I am excited today to have Chris Leonard with me on today. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Hannah.
You're welcome. And Chris, I'm going to let you tell us a little bit about who you are, and then we're going to dive right in.
Sounds good. I am an educator and social worker, psychotherapist. I've been an educator for about 35 years, social worker for 27 years. I spent the last 22 years of my life owning and operating the Sage Day schools. Recently am transitioning out of that into more of a consulting role. I also am the chief learning officer at an organization called Thrive, where we provide therapists for public and private schools. We put the therapists in the school, we train them, and we provide ancillary services to the schools surrounding student mental health and mental wellness. And then I have had a private practice in New Jersey since 1995 as well. These days, I see a lot of adolescents, a lot of young adults. I also see couples and families, but a lot of work on transition these days. And with COVID, especially, the young adults are really struggling with just adjusting to life. You know, the 20-somethings are really having, I think, the hardest time of all. So
safe to say, Chris has a lot of experience. By the way, you don't look old enough to have not had 35 years of experience in education. I'm not going to embarrass you and ask you how old you are, but unless you want to share it. But
you can. I will be 60 in February.
Okay. I did not know that, by the way, for those of you who are watching. I had no idea. And so I've kind of, gotten to know Chris, we've met a couple times before, and also I've had professional interactions with Sage Day School since I do have patients who attend there, so I'm quite familiar with it. And so I am really excited to have you on because I know you have a wealth of experience. So one of the things I want to talk about, Chris, is tell me a little bit about kind of your story. Like, how did you end up in this world of mental health and being a therapist, and what's your background? And I think it's always helpful for people to kind of know how'd you get here?
Well, the first inkling of any idea that I would work in mental health came when I was in college. I was a philosophy major. And at the time I was contemplating going for a PhD in philosophy and teaching at the college level. And I was talking to my advisor about it. And he said, philosophy? You don't want to be a philosophy. You don't want to do that. You're going to be a therapist someday. And I was like, therapist? No way. I'm not going to be a therapist. At the same time I was in college, I was working at this very progressive summer camp in Vermont called Killeen. And that was owned by John Seeger, who is the brother of Pete Seeger, the folk singer. Wow. And John was a Quaker and a conscientious objector during World War II. And he and his wife took over this wonderful camp in 1948. And it had these amazing values. And it was for about 100 kids every summer. So it was a place where everybody knew your name. And I started working there in college. And as I got out of college and wasn't really sure on a sense of direction, John said to me, well, why don't you become a teacher? Because you can keep working at camp. And I said, well, that sounds like a great idea. And I actually started my teaching career in Central Harlem in 1985. And I was given 30 kids from 2 overcrowded classrooms who were the most unruly kids from the 2 classrooms. And the principal said, you only need to do one thing, Mr. Leonard, keep them in the room. So it was a real trial by fire, tremendous learning experience. Over 3 years I spent in that school. And then I transitioned out to schools in New Jersey, and kind of discovered along the way that I was more interested in the conversations that I would have with kids about what was going on in their life than I was. As much fun as I had teaching science and making a mess with the kids, they used to say to me, Mr. Leonard, are we going to make a mess today? And I'd say, absolutely. And they loved it. As much as I loved teaching all the subjects, I really enjoyed it when a kid came to me after school and said, I'm worried about my brother, or, I think my parents are getting a divorce. They don't talk to each other anymore. And I would have these conversations and I realized, I also seem to spend a lot of time on the phone with friends, and they're always calling me and telling me about what's going on in their lives. And I really do like talking to people about what's going on with them. So I ended up going to social work school. and swore I would never work in a school again.
Now, did you go to social work school while you were still teaching, or you left teaching?
I actually left teaching. I had gotten married by that point, and my wife was teaching. And so we kind of lived off what she was making, and then I was doing tutoring on the side. And then after my first year of placement, field placement, I was actually hired by Alternatives to Domestic Violence to run men's groups. So I was doing part-time work running groups, and then I was doing the tutoring. So we were just kind of making ends meet with macaroni and cheese and tuna. And then when I got out of school, I began working with adolescent sex offenders. And I did that.
That's baptism by fire there.
It sure is. Yeah. So between working in domestic violence and working with both the men and the women was challenging, because people really do get stuck in patterns. And there are reasons why people stay in those very difficult situations. And it's tough work. And then, of course, when you're dealing and working with people who've been mandated for therapy, that's a whole other challenge. And, the kids who had been found guilty of sexual offenses, they were all mandated for treatment. So nobody wanted to be there. So that was pretty challenging also. And then I transitioned out of that to working at a substance abuse program. And that's where I met one of my longtime partners and friends, John Riley, who was my supervisor there. And he came to me one day and he said, I don't think we're going to have health insurance for a while. You and I are going to go work at this school. And, if there's anything wrong with your teeth or anything, get them fixed now. And that's where Sage Day came into our lives. And
did you talk to your wife about this before you decided?
Oh, yes. I remember distinctly sitting on our deck with John and his wife and my wife, and we were kind of talking about the pros and cons of leaving the security of the public sector and going into the private sector, and kind of taking on this was a startup that somebody else had started up. And after about a year, they wanted to make a leadership change, and they asked John and I to begin running the school. And they said, if you guys make this work, we're going to make you partners. And so we made it work. And then one school became two, and two schools became three, and three became four. And then we partnered with a couple of psychiatrists to open New Alliance Academy in 2008. And then also around that time, we started the Sage Thrive services, which are the services where we place and supervise therapists in schools. So I moved up from Sage. I started out teaching, and then I became a therapist there. And then I became a principal and went back to school for my principal's license. And I was principal of the main campus for 13 years. And then I stepped out of running one particular school and became director of operations of all the campuses, all the while maintaining my private practice. So I've stayed very busy.
Really, it's really neat how your life, kind of the two worlds kind of came together, right? You have your educational background and you have your therapy background, and it kind of came wonderfully all together, right, of the hats you wore. It's kind of neat how that happened.
You really hit the nail on the head, Dr. Hanna, because that's exactly how I've thought about it. I really look back at all the experiences I had at being a camp counselor, and by the way, borrowing the values from the camp and bringing them to school. The rules were very simple at Kill Elite. There was, no scapegoating, no put downs, no rudeness, and no breaking group concentration. Those were the 4 rules of camp. And I took those rules and brought them to school to kind of create this intentional community. And between the therapy background and the camp background and the education background, it really became this kind of synergy that just developed over the years. So you really captured it.
And it's really, the other thing which is interesting in your story is that, and it's applicable really to a lot of kids who are about to graduate from college and young adults, about direction, right? You had mentors, you had people who gave you direction, right? You had people who came alongside you, and it's kind of interesting, right? That there's always that mentor or somebody who encourages us to do something. And I find honestly that a lot of kids who are in their end of college years, grad school, 20s, and especially right now, are feeling lost, right? And I don't know if you want to talk about that a little, because I know, in terms of some of the kids you work with, right, about life transition.
Yes, no, that is definitely a thing that I am seeing right now. I mean, there are statistics on this, on 18 to 28-year-olds, and how they seem to be hardest hit by the pandemic. When you think about the life tasks of the 20-something, you are graduating college, you are moving forward with your life, you feel that you have your whole life ahead of you, you have hopefully a job and some disposable income for the first time in your life, you're unattached, you have freedom, you have potential, you have your health. Obviously this is when everything's going right. It doesn't happen that way for everybody, but generally, and for the most part, kids in their 20s have this kind of, my whole life is ahead of me. They also always have struggled with confidence, because they are comparing themselves constantly to their friends who've graduated. Oh, this friend's in law school. This friend has got a job right out of the gate in computer science and is doing fantastically. And I still don't know what I want to do. And that was me when I was in my 20s. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. And I was watching my friends go into engineering and law and all these other things and saying, oh my gosh, what about me? What am I going to do? So there's always that uncertainty and that excitement and that potential. But now in this time, it was impossible for 3 months to get out and be with friends. It was impossible to have that sense of adventure. If you wanted to take a gap year and go somewhere else, well, that wasn't going to happen. So all of these things and these opportunities that are usually open to young people had been closed down and are still really not that much more open. I talked to some 20-somethings who are interviewing, and they're able to get these kind of high-end professional jobs that are remote. And there is some excitement that they have about that. But I talked to others, recent college graduates, who really feel, I'm just struggling to maybe get a marginal job somewhere, but it's really kind of tough even to get that going right now.
Now, historically, prior to COVID, I've always found many more young men struggling with this transition than young women. And I'm curious, are you seeing that pattern hold, or are you seeing it now that it's both?
You know what, I would say that I think that pattern is holding. I can say that just represented in my practice, I am seeing not that there are no young women, but there are fewer young women than young men struggling with this. I think that I think that girls generally and women generally develop a little quicker than boys.
And we know brain development, biology, is
you see
says
that
that.
even in elementary school
Yeah.
and in high school. And I think the way school is structured and the kinds of qualities and skills that you need to bring to succeed in school early, I think girls catch on to that generally faster than boys. And so I think they kind of come out a little bit ahead, and boys have some catching up to do. I think that is definitely a phenomenon.
Yeah, we definitely tend to see many more guys struggle, with that transition from college to adulthood than young women. So
I think culturally, there's still an expectation of males that we're supposed to have it all figured out.
Yeah.
And we're not. It's not okay for males to say, I'm not sure, I don't know, I'm confused, I'm worried, those are not considered masculine qualities, and therefore there's less room to talk about things, because as you know, if you can put something into words, if you can talk about it, it kind of loses its spell over you. And now you feel, okay, now I can start to make a plan and do something with this.
This is so, and there's so many facets to this, right? In terms of, again, the presence of mentors and people to guide some of these guys, and obviously examples, where somebody can come alongside them and kind of say, hey, it's okay, this is okay, this is not okay. I also feel like some of those challenges maybe are more prevalent in certain kind of socioeconomic constructs, right? If you're growing up in a home where you must get a job, regardless of what that job is, you don't have time to sit around and kind of figure out your career path. And I know, right, we practice in the context of Northern New Jersey outside of New York City, which is its own culture, its own beast, I would even say.
Yes.
It's its own little world here. So that also puts a lot of pressure, right, for kids to achieve to a certain level of how success is defined and what it looks like. And that can be crushing for some of these guys, especially if they come from families where their dad or their mom or their family is very successful.
That is another thing that we're seeing right now. In fact, when I was doing a presentation on group the other day, providing group therapy in schools, and one of the questions that came up is, how do we help these high achieving students who put tremendous pressure on themselves, who are taking 5 AP classes and really ending up being hospitalized and kind of falling apart because they feel this tremendous sense of pressure and responsibility to move forward. And I think that there is something about this, it is a characteristic of this region in which we live, that there is this kind of expectation. Dad is successful, mom is successful, they are professionals, they have moved forward, they have done things with their lives, and I need to do that as well. And I need to get cracking, and I need to get into that amazing school, and I need to be with the amazing people at the amazing school, and I need to be one of the most amazing people at the amazing school. And
that's just crushing. I'm just, even you saying it, it was like, oh man.
And so often that experience is, even if you've been that amazing person in high school, then you get to the school with all the amazing people, and you're just one of the people. You're not amazing. And that is a narcissistic blow that people have to either absorb or not absorb. And how do you cope with that? And how do you define yourself? I was always the smartest kid in the class. Who am I now? What does that mean about me?
Yeah, that's so well said, because right, the identity, we take on that identity of the smart kid. Those of us who've gone through medical school could relate to everything you just said, right? That for a lot of us, if not almost all of us, that was our path academically, with that kind of sense that how well we did in school was our identity, or even, being physicians, our identity is so wrapped up in that. And if that's challenged in any way, we don't know how to deal. And so they have these kids who haven't even gotten there yet, and they're already being crushed with anxiety and depression prior to that. So that's, and that's, again, it's really great, because, you have your life story, right? Your experience that you're bringing to the table to kind of help these kids and realize, wait, it's okay to kind of have these in-between periods, right? The world doesn't end. You're not a disaster. You're not a failure, right? You can kind of help them to kind of get a more accurate picture, or a better narrative, really, of how to proceed. So I want to transition a little bit, since you're a wealth of knowledge on schools and mental health. And one of the things that all of us who see kids and teenagers see all the time, and I have to admit with alarming increase over the last 10 years, is kids who don't want to go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that has always been fascinating to me, because I don't remember myself or really any friends ever thinking that way as kids about not going to school. I don't think the thought ever crossed my mind. I'm pretty sure when I talk to other people my age, when they tell me, what do you mean the kids don't want to go to school? It was not something that ever crossed their mind either. And so I know, and for those of you who are watching, who are, in the professional world, we talk about school refusers, right? We use that term, and it's kind of, I don't know, there's a pejorative aspect to it, maybe a little bit, because it's not accurate that, there's a negative connotation to it, and we think that children who don't want to go to school, there's a lot going on there, and it's very complex. So if you can kind of begin to kind of unpack for me this whole phenomenon, and kind of just some thoughts, and I think maybe even some practical suggestions for parents who are watching, or even people who work in schools, since I know this is an area you have a lot of expertise in.
Sure. No, I'd be happy to. I think what I can say, I mean, that what you said about it not even crossing your mind, the whole notion of not going to school. I mean, did we ever think, wow, I don't want to go to school today? Yes, thought about it all the time.
Yeah,
did
but
I ever fake an
wasn't
illness
an option.
to stay home? Yes, I did. But that was like, I faked an illness to stay home. And then I was
Right.
like, my friends are at school and I'm not. This kind of isn't that great. I'm going to go back tomorrow.
Right.
What's different? I think I've often thought about writing a book called The Age of the Optional, because I think that there are many things that used to be just taken for granted that are now considered optional in our culture as a whole. And I think that our culture is so molded now to personal preferences. It used to be that when you wanted to watch TV, there were 7 channels, and 5 of them came in well, and 2 of them didn't. If you wanted to adjust the antenna, you could. I'm really dating myself now. But there wasn't a whole lot of choice. Now there are 300 channels, and that's just the beginning. We can customize our cars, we can customize our phones, we can customize our news. We don't have to hear opinions that we don't like, which is a whole other conversation.
I was about to say, we can do a whole nother video on that one.
But because there are so many things where I get to choose to do things the way I want to, I get to receive what I want to. School is not designed for that. Our schools are based on a model of a factory model. And a great thinker on this is Ken Robinson, who recently passed away this spring, unfortunately. But Ken Robinson really talked about this factory model and how schools are really designed. Our schools were designed in the 1800s. And Horace Mann had gone over to Prussia and saw how obedient the Prussian culture was, and really brought those things home to America, so that the structure of Prussian schools and the reason the Prussian soldiers were so successful was that they were obedient. So this primary driving force, this under the hood thing in American schools, is create a culture where people are all ready to do the same thing at the same time, do repetitive things all day long. Schools have bells, just like factories. There are periods where this begins and this begins and this begins. Things are organized into subjects. We never experience life that way at all, except in school. You don't say, oh, I've got to figure out how I'm going to make my rent this month. That's an English thing, or that's a math thing, or you kind of go, well, I have to make sure I have a job, and I have to make sure that I'm saving a certain amount of money for my rent. And I have to make all these decisions, which would cross several disciplines. But in school, we divide these disciplines up. And as Ken Robinson said, we organize kids by age, as if that's the best reason why kids should be in the same room together. He said it's almost as if we're organizing kids by date of manufacture. So kids are coming to school to this experience that was designed to get them to be obedient and work in a factory. And there aren't any factory jobs. It used to be in New Jersey. You could grow up in Bergen County, New Jersey. You could go work at the Ford plant in Mahwah. You could work there for 40 years. You could retire and keep your home in New Jersey, and you could be fine. And you were the guy, and your wife didn't have to work. That is not the world in which we live now. Those jobs aren't there. One-income households are rare. And the kinds of incomes that used to support a whole household would not even begin to support a household today, certainly not in Bergen County. So there's this disconnect between what kids see as the kinds of choices and exciting things that they can do in the world and what's made available to them in school. So that's another reason. Then there's a real kind of epidemic of anxiety. And the parents have anxiety, the kids have anxiety. There is economic anxiety. There's anxiety about COVID now. There is anxiety about achievement. There's anxiety about me becoming what I need to be. There's anxiety about living up to the expectations of my parents. So the causes of school refusal are multivariate. And so sometimes it's the child's anxiety, sometimes it's the parent's anxiety and needing to have the child stay at home with them. In some cases, it's not really, school refusal is kind of pejorative. In some cases, it's school anxiety, school avoidance. In some cases, it's pure truancy. The difference is the truant student is out having fun. The kid who's refusing to come to school or avoiding school is miserable. They're not really happy at, generally they're not happy at home. Although they can be. Home can be such a cozy place. Why should I go to that uncomfortable place that smells funny and the food isn't that great and it's not that exciting when I can stay within the comfort of my home? And then the final point I'll make is people sometimes believe now that there's COVID and there's remote and hybrid learning, well, school refusal is over. Not true. School refusal always has and continues to exist on a continuum. So there are kids who will go to school every day, but they'll spend the day in the nurse's office. And there are kids who will go to school every day, but they'll come out of every class and find a way to the bathroom or someplace else. So they're kind of avoiding school as well. And there are kids who don't show up for their hybrid or remote learning.
I was about to say, I've had, since school started a few weeks ago, I've had kids who have refused to go onto the virtual classroom, or they go on, but they're watching YouTube the whole time or Netflix, or they're not participating at all. They're not doing any work. So you are correct. And I think that there's all sorts of reasons, as you kind of outlined. With anxiety would probably be the biggest one. But I think there's this fundamental issue, and you hit on it, that anxiety by its nature makes kids want to avoid, right? It's this whole notion that I can't tolerate my distress.
Yes.
And I think we live in a culture that basically says avoid distress, avoid not feeling good, avoid any semblance of something outside your comfort zone or something that doesn't come naturally to you. And it's just that narrative really feeds into this. So it is easier to avoid and be all comfortable at home where you're not challenged and you stay at home and you play video games and you kind of do your thing. It is easier. It's more fun. And I think, a lot of parents are kind of frustrated and feel helpless. They don't know what to do. And I also think there's a role, and I kind of want to ask you about this, is that what role can schools play to help parents? And I'm saying to help parents because ultimately I think that parents are going to be the primary agent of the change for these kids to be going to school, right? If you have 8-year-old, 9-year-old, or even 12-year-old who's stuck in this pattern, it's very hard for them to just get unstuck by us saying some magic word to them. Ultimately, right. It's the parents we need to equip. So can you kind of talk a little bit about what can schools do to support these parents and to kind of prevent or to stop these vicious cycles?
I think, well, the first thing that the school has to do is to develop a mindset that they're going to be encountering this issue. These students are no longer outliers. These students are going to be a percentage of your population moving forward, and you can expect that this is going to happen. So you need to build in the infrastructure to be ready for it to happen. And what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that is that you need to have people who have the time to work with these kids, which is one of the things that we do with Thrive, is that we have these people who have the time to work with the kids and see them a few times a week, take time out of their day right now. I'm going to go greet them at the door and help them get into the building. I'm going to go out to the car and talk them into, hey, come in and just sit with me for a while. Let's talk this through. And then we'll talk about going to class later, but let's just talk right now. So it's having parents know that you've got a team of people in place who are going to help you and support you in getting your kid in. For parents, it's a matter of making the decision to not just go with that notion that that we always have to be comfortable, that you were talking about. Anxiety makes us uncomfortable. Depression invites us in and says, go back to bed. Anxiety says, get rid of me, get rid of me, get rid of me, get rid of me. This is awful. Not that depression is good, but depression is kind of self-perpetuating in its, come back under the covers with me. So parents have to accept the proposition that I don't have to give in. I need not to give in. I need to set limits and boundaries. So if you are going to be home, there aren't going to be video games. There's not going to be Netflix. There's not going to be your phone. There's not going to be these things. Home is not going to be this cozy, fun, warm place. Sometimes schools need to be able to support the parent who is feeling overwhelmed in their own right, who really wants the child to stay home and take care of them. Either by providing referrals for the parent or providing support for the parent, so that the parent is willing to let go and say to the child, you must go to school. So part of it, and when you're successful in helping a student return to school, there's been a team approach. There are teachers who are helping, there are school counselors who are helping, there are parents who are helping. It's really, and sometimes there are peers, other kids who you enlist in the process of helping a kid get back in and find the reasons to return. Because they all have the reasons to stay home.
And it is, and it's a holistic approach. And you just kind of one last thought here on this. There's a temptation sometimes amongst us psychiatrists to think that if we just prescribe the right medicine for the anxiety, that's going to fix it. It's this whole notion of magic pill kind of fantasy about what medicines do. And I've said to a lot of families, I said, listen, yes, we need to treat the anxiety if the anxiety is to the degree that a medication is truly indicated, but don't assume by us doing a medication that somehow that's going to solve everything. Because there needs to be this team approach. It needs to be systematic. There's entrenched behaviors that have been in place. There's a whole system in place that we need to disrupt, and it involves mom, dad, kid, school, teacher, administrator, right? It's we always look for easy solutions, and I think this is the temptation of my profession, is this whole throw a med at it. And somehow that's going to fix it. And I think a lot of times, a lot of parents actually look to us as prescribers to do that also, and just hoping that takes care of it. If we just go on the right medication, and that's just not true. It's an unrealistic expectations of medications. We're way too complex as human beings that we think somehow medicines are going to solve, a situation where a child's not going to school. So.
Yeah, there's really a parallel process of that with individual therapy for children and adolescents, because people want to drop their kids off and say, fix my kid. Yeah. And they don't want to necessarily participate in the process, but that, the parent, one of the things we always have done at Sage Day is we've always provided family therapy. And we've always said to parents that family therapy is a component of our program, and we need you in, and the kids who do well here are the kids whose parents participate. And it's true, time and time again, it was borne out that the kids who succeeded, the kids who overcame their anxiety, their depression, or whatever the reasons were that were making it so they needed a therapeutic school, the kids whose parents took part were the kids who really thrived and did much better. So it really does need to be systemic. Sometimes change cannot happen without the medication. Right. But unless you combine that with the other inputs.
Medications have a role to play. I'm not against medicine. I prescribe medications, but I also think we need to have realistic expectations of medications and understand that role is there, but it's not everything.
Yes.
This is one of my soapboxes, Chris, about I believe that kids get overprescribed and end up on too many medications because we're chasing symptoms. We're trying to fix something with medicine that is not biological. That's not the issue. And it almost kind of makes us seem like these kids are just robots. And if you just program them, put the right code in, that somehow that fixes it. And sorry, as human beings, we're a lot more complex than that. So,
Oh,
well,
I agree with you 100%. I do.
so,
And that whole symptom chasing, I mean, it's the classic thing. You eliminate this symptom, and whatever the energy is finds another way to express itself.
yeah,
So unless you get to the energy that is driving, because one of the most valuable things that a professor ever said to me in social work school was, she was actually yelling at all of us one day. We were doing our process recordings where you had to kind of describe the sessions that you were doing as a student. And she was reading them, and she was recognizing that we were all engaged in heavy duty advice giving. And so she said to us, your job is not to give people solutions to their problems. Your job is to give people problems with their solutions, because people are bringing their solutions to bear. And so when somebody is bringing their solution to bear, and this is my solution, you can, turn off this switch over here, but that's not going to get them to re-examine their solution. So you really have to get in there with people and help them see how what they're doing, there are reasons why they're choosing it to do it. And that's why people have such a hard time giving those things up. That's what resistance is all about. You have to respect that resistance and realize that people do have viable and important reasons why they're doing what they're doing or not doing what they're doing. But then it's a matter of helping them see how this is not working for me, and then helping them, once people can see, okay, this is not working for me, now I'm open to, okay, where do I go from here?
sometimes, by the time children are not going to school, things have gotten so bad, right? There was all this stuff happened before, right? And then hopefully at that point where it's like, okay, what we're doing is not working. We clearly need to have a different strategy. So,
Yeah.
well, I want to thank you. This has been a great conversation. I think
agree.
you have a lot of insight and a lot of experience that I really appreciate. And I think, like I said earlier, that you kind of have these two hats you've been wearing, and they came together and give you special insight. And I think we're going to have you back on again
I'd love that.
at some point. I think there's a lot of different topics and things that I think we could talk about. The fact that you're a philosophy major is kind of interesting to me, and even social media stuff to me is interesting, especially what you said about that we tend to just want to listen to those who agree with us. And kind of the value of listening to those who disagree with us. What a concept, right?
Yes.
Especially in our current climate. So thank you. And I really, really appreciated this conversation. Hope to have you on again. For those of you who are watching, thank you for tuning in, and subscribe to our channel and share this if you think this is helpful to somebody. So thank you.